Okay, could folks hear me okay? Hear me on Zoom? All right, let me just log in to this machine. Oh, let me share my screen. What have other classes? Does anybody have other classes that were canceled because of snow last week? Or what's like the protocol for making it up? Have they said anything, done anything?
The hard part about this class is it's weekly, so
Yeah. Yeah, it's it throws us off just because it's right by spring break as well. Um, I guess that's maybe another question in terms of folks' appetite. I'm trying to not give anything in terms of homework or assignments over spring break, which I think is pretty normal. But we're in a little bit of a crunch because we should have had homework 5 due, and then we should have got going on some of the essays. But let me show you the calendar, and maybe we could work through together how to navigate a bit of this. I guess one thing for tonight is I'm going to go through story writing. I don't know an easy way other than to kind of get you kind of homework 5, 6 together and then 7, 8 together. I think we could organize it such that they're due different times, but I'll have to kind of intro those together just with both spring break and then the day we missed, unfortunately, on Thursday. But yeah, it's hard with the one night per week because if we miss one, it takes out the whole week. Alternatively, I could have recorded, and we have recordings from past classes for the lecture on stories. But I think what we'll do is we'll maybe look at the calendar together, get input from you. There's a little bit of wiggle room, right, in terms of kind of how to break things out. And then I'll take a look at the homework 5, homework 6. A lot of that's all about getting going on projects. And I guess if you remember in past lectures, I wanted to at least folks who are here go through your projects, right? Make sure people have project teams and make sure things are ready to roll for kind of when you get back from spring break, because things are going to move pretty quickly. So for those who didn't come in this evening who are in person, it would have been a nice day to come in just because this is the opportunity to share ideas around projects and that kind of thing. And we could look at the spreadsheet that I think folks might have signed up as well with Rhythm and that kind of thing. But I guess first off, let me log into Zoom and share the calendar and show you a little bit of the dilemma that we have with missing last week. Sorry, is there a buzzing? Are folks hearing that buzzing? Oh, it is. Okay. Okay, let me sign in. I guess should we close the door? Maybe would that help, or do you want to pull it? Thank you. Oh, oh man, let's see. 1 second. Okay, let me share my screen. And I think one thing maybe to call out, I'm gonna share this calendar and we could kind of talk through how we want to arrange things given the snow day. The essays, if you remember me talking about them in the past, it's part of kind of the team project. And so each team will submit an essay and then review an essay. I'll talk through kind of the setup of that tonight. But while I flash the calendar, you're going to see a lot of essays and a lot of essays due. Maybe don't get too nervous when you see it because it works out. I'm going to try to err on the side of yeah, maybe reducing the amount of work given the snow day because it's hard to make up. And so maybe homework 5, 6 doesn't have as big of a footprint. And instead of 7, 8 essays, maybe it's 5 or 6 essays. So I think that's maybe the only way to solve for the snow day. So let me flash my screen and then we can kind of walk through things from there. Okay, so we're here on the 21st and we have to get homework 5 going. So I'll share that one as well. Oh, sorry. Good. Yeah. Okay, so the big one we need to get through is stories and writing stories. And maybe instead of me just lecturing on stories, I'll go through slides a little bit faster, but maybe we even start writing them and writing them in the context of your projects, right? So think about project topics. I mean, have folks gotten topics or at least to start teams? Is that yes from everybody for the most part? Okay. So yeah, I think tonight we could do whiteboard architectures, think of the last half hour, right? Maybe we stop 6:45, 7, and folks that are here, we could do kind of whiteboard architecture. So it checks all the boxes that's in the rubric, right? So make sure you have a data collector and analyzer, right? And a web app. So we could do that. And then maybe as we're doing stories this evening and kind of introducing the concepts of stories, people could think about, okay, how would I write stories, for my project, right? And get those in a backlog. So I'll introduce that. And then homework 5, as I mentioned, is all about getting organized, getting teams going, getting stories flowing. And then next week is spring break. So I guess it's up to, individuals. For me, if I was writing software, it'd be hard not to write software over spring break, but I understand if people are traveling or whatnot. But I'll make it such that nothing is due the week of spring break. So we'll be off this week. And then this is what next week's gonna look like, or sorry, the week after spring break. So homework 5 will be due. So that'll be a week. And I think folks should be able to turn around pretty quick. Maybe once we give out the homework, maybe as soon as tomorrow, right, give feedback, right, in terms of how much is there and how much you've thought about the project. For the homework 5 in the start of the project, it could be still a little bit slushy in terms of the idea, the concept. There's probably a follow-up the week of the 1st, and even the 4th, the lecture, maybe the last half hour for folks who weren't here tonight. We could also do kind of that whiteboard architecture to make sure everything's covered in the rubric. There's a few lectures that we kind of have to do, which are part of the rubric. So the milk problem, the email verifier, and then the milk problem continued. Those are all around messaging and message queues. So those are, if you think of the rubric for the project, those were on the far left-hand side. Does it help if I flash that for a second? The rubric? Yeah, okay, let me just do this for a second. Unfortunately, I'm in different browsers, but let me just flash it for 1 second. So we have it on Zoom as well as here. So it's these three that are related to, or mainly the first two here that are related to introducing messaging and a message queue within your project. And I think when I talked about like the health check, there's definitely, you know, kind of a range in terms of baking these things in, right? It's just the appearance of a message queue, right? To hand data from one thing to another. That's maybe the interesting bit. You don't have to have an event-driven architecture necessarily, or, you know, going full on with something like Kafka, if people heard of that, or RabbitMQ are some of the message queues that are out there. What else? This one we picked up. There's a few others here in terms of integration tests, test doubles that I think we could sneak in over the next kind of month or so. But it's mainly these around acceptance testing and whatnot that we should make sure the box gets checked so you see it. Okay, so that's, I guess, right when you get back from spring break. Homework 5's due. Essay 1 will be due, which I'll show you. And then on that Thursday, we'll go through all things kind of message related, right? Such that we get through the rubric. And there might be something in here around the testing side as well. And we might even be able to pick up that continuous integration delivery side. The email verifier has, I would say, a lot of tests in terms of the stack because it maybe represents more of a distributed system. This is a project that Tyson and I did during the early days of COVID-19, and it was for the NHS. So it was a contact tracing app. I think I mentioned maybe in past lectures, that app appears today in your phone under like settings on an Apple device on exposure notifications is where it ended up, which is kind of cool. Okay, so that's the 4th. And then here's where it gets a little bit interesting, and I'm kind of still working through maybe some of the details in terms of how to navigate. Yep. We'll get it tonight. So yeah, I'll go over it tonight. Yeah, we'll go over the doc tonight and you'll get it tonight. Yeah. The only hesitation is I looked at it before class and I was thinking maybe there's some modification depending on how folks feel with what I'm about to show you here for April. Okay, so here's what April looks like. So essay 1 will be due on the 3rd. And then I mentioned I'll talk about essays. So there's the team submitting an essay, and we'll submit it to a wiki. And then there's also then reviewing others who've submitted essays. So imagine, you know, team 1 submits an essay, team 2, 3, and 4 reviews team 1's essay. So that's what the review is. And the, you know, call it the Wednesday, Sunday cadence. It might seem a little heavy, but I think when I introduce more of the essays, folks will kind of understand a little bit more of the cadence. But yeah, so essays due Wednesday, and then the review is due on Sunday. And then that follows up with essay 2 due the next Wednesday, the review then the next Sunday, and then we bounce back and forth. And this is the one maybe, I also tried not to schedule things for that last week, but we don't have a final. So I figured putting the essay review on that last Sunday, I mean, I'm happy to move it to Monday as well, would work out. But I think finals is it the 4th through the 8th? Or is that the 8th is kind of the last day of class? Is that? Last day of finals is the 8th? Yeah. So I think people know the project is the final. And homework 8, I'll take a look at homework 8. There's some wiggle room here in terms of when this is due. More often than not, the reason I put it here is because it's paired with presentations. And also to give kind of the teaching crew time to grade. Like the projects are actually tough to grade, but this one we might be able to move a little bit. So let me bounce back, but yeah, essay 5 will be due on the 1st. The review for essay 5 then on the 5th. And if I bounce back here into April, so email verifier, milk problem I talked about, homework 5 will be due. Next Thursday, homework 6, or sorry, I should say the next Thursday after we get back from break, homework 6 is due. And then I'll talk more about 7 and 8 here in a minute. 7 will be assigned, 7 is due, and then you'll have kind of a few weeks to wrap up the project. The homeworks 5, 6, 7, and 8 are really, I guess the reason we assign them is so folks are making progress on their project in week versus saving it all to the end. And naturally, there's questions that come up with the project and that kind of thing. It's pretty common for projects to adjust a little bit in terms of what you're submitting. And by submitting homework 5, 6, and 7, think this is parts of the project, right, that you're submitting along the way. It gives us an opportunity to catch folks if they're off track in the project and that kind of thing as well. So yeah, a lot going on. We'll try to pick up some of the CAP theorem and concurrency on the 11th. And then I guess do you know how many project teams we ended up with in terms of?
It changed quite a bit as of homework 4.
Yeah, mainly, so part of the project is presenting, right? And you don't have to be done with the project to present, right? So you could actually present, kind of midway through, 3/4 of the way through. It's actually, there's kind of pros and cons for presenting early, because if you present early, you'll get feedback, right? Students will ask questions, we'll ask questions, and that could help in terms of, boosting your grade or getting feedback, such that if you miss something on the rubric and didn't, have time in class or come to office hours, present that, because you'll get feedback during the presentation. I'll ask, oh, where's the message queue? I didn't see it during the presentation. And somebody might be like, oh, shoot, I didn't have it. You'll have, 3 weeks, ish to get that in. And then flip side, right, if you present on the last day, it's similar, right? You get through a little bit more of the project and whatnot before you present. So I think over the years, it's worked out in terms of individuals presenting or teams presenting early, teams presenting late. I would say anybody who's presenting late, spend more time, right, asking questions during office hours or earlier. And folks who are presenting early, yeah, make sure you get the feedback, right, such that you could adjust.
Everybody should try to present. Definitely. I think even if your project isn't complete at all, present as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, the intent also isn't to push folks to like, oh my gosh, you have to have this perfect app deployed, whatnot. But it definitely is to get folks comfortable sharing ideas, sharing their project. So I think I flashed before the presentation template. I could bring that up again.
You could even present when you think it's like stuck somewhere, present it. And that might be something that we can adjust.
Yeah, there's a bunch there. Let me, I guess, what am I sharing on the screen right now? Any questions while I'm pulling up the template for the presentations? Okay, let me bounce over. So this one should be shared, I believe. And yeah, if you think about the presentation, if I flip through some of these, right? Couple minutes on, I don't know, how you landed on the project. Like, what was the inspiration? You know, what was the idea? Or, you know, it might be an individual. Or it's like, oh my gosh, I always wanted to, you know, figure out a better workout schedule than Strava gives me, or something like that. So there's a few minutes there, right? Then a few minutes going through kind of the tech stack. And if you think of, you know, kind of the world as it relates to the rubric, and this will also be, I'll show you the essays. Naturally, there's going to be a language. You might use a build tool. Messaging, like we talked about, data persistence. So this would be something like a Postgres, a MongoDB, a MySQL. Monitoring, you know, was the health check, right? As well as the Prometheus and Grafana, the extra credit that you had an opportunity for. This might have got cut off from the slide, but continuous integration, continuous delivery, right? So this was the InfoQ article, right, that we deployed. So everything here you should have seen. And then the request is also to draw your high-level architecture, right, as everything fits together. So, you know, use this as an example. You know, 3-box diagram, right? You should have all 3: web, analyzer, collector. You might be getting data from InfoQ like we did for homework 4, or you might get data from a simulator. I used an example, maybe in the past, there was one where it was waypoints for like an autonomous, it was a boat somebody submitted one year, right? So they were actually collecting waypoints from another project that, you know, they built. And then after that is what demo. So this could be live or recorded. I would say recorded doesn't work as well. Maybe just putting that out there. Only because what? Like sometimes the video doesn't work, the sound doesn't come through clear, right? It doesn't present well. And if you think of maybe some of the grading around the presentation, it's how well you communicate what's going on. Handing off to a video, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice if, like, you know, something didn't work in the room. So yeah, you could demo off your laptop, right? With working software, you could demo off the environment that you deployed in. And if you need to demo with the video. And then the last one is retrospective. So this is what went well, what was confusing, what didn't go well in terms of the project. All right, so that's the template. And then if I bounce back to the calendar here, right, that's what you're presenting. And again, the reason maybe I asked how many we ended up with, it's depending on the size, depending on the teams where you land in terms of, is it a team of 3, is it a team of 7? It might be such that we could push, we might need only 2 days of presentations. So some years in the past, we did 2 days, and we might have had interesting breaks in between, or we might have gone an extra half hour, which is maybe a lot because it's only once a week. But I left it a little bit up to the class, right, to decide some years, just to have an extra week, right, before they presented. So yeah, maybe think about the calendar. Feedback from me, I think we got in a little bit of hot water with the day that we missed, and especially the day we missed being right before spring break, which, yeah, I kind of wish it was the spring break, but I'm sure you don't. Yeah, it'd have been nice if it was the Thursday of spring break. Yeah. Anything jumping out for folks?
I guess like just curious on what more 5 is, like how much is gonna be there, because if we have, you know, travel plans over the spring break, I guess the goal is to not do anything over spring break. But if we do that goal, then does that leave us like not that spring break's next week, right?
Spring break's next week. So, I mean, you still have the same time as if it was due, on the 27th. So you still have a full week to do it. Yeah, so there's a week in between each, and maybe we spend a little time after class, and I hesitated to shoot it out right now or even go through it because I wanted to get feedback from the crew here. If it was too heavy, we'd lighten it up, I guess is where I was going. Traditionally, folks would have a little bit more time, but I don't know if folks use the time, right? Like, I don't know if the homework was big enough that it needed the time, or you just had more time to complete it, right? Where you do other stuff or something like that.
Yeah, I know personally with the other homeworks so far, we've had 2 weeks. And I've
Yeah.
used one.
Yeah. Yeah, so these aren't coding the same way. You'll see in a minute when we start doing stories. Or here, I could flash it if it eases things a bit here. One second. Okay, so I'll share this now, but maybe there's a minute where we'll take a pass through it. Even if we share it tonight, maybe in the next day. I want to take another look we didn't have an opportunity for all of us to get together in terms of grading too. So the flip side to all of this for us is the missed day and whatnot. There's a condensed schedule too for us grading. So some of that is also what I wanted to catch the crew on our side. Okay, could folks see this? So I won't read through all this, and we could drop it in, if folks want to take a look at it during break, we could drop it in right now, right? The shared drive. This there's like a staging drive that we have, and then we move it over, right, in class. But what? So if we go through, there's a bit of a setup, right, in terms of the life cycle. There's a conversation around a lot of stuff I've been saying, right? Pick the tech stack of choice, right, that you want, whether it's Python, Java, Ruby, Go. And then some of this is really getting going, right, in terms of the team. But let me show you. So this is, I'm talking about where you deploy and that kind of stuff, right? So think some of this is more homework 4. And then if you get down here, right, this is the task, right? So first task, make sure you have a team, right? Second, get the repo going. Third, pick a tool, and that's tonight's lecture. Oops. In terms of Pivotal Tracker, Trello, I think what I'll recommend tonight is GitHub projects. So GitHub did really well in the last few months around projects, and I might even use that while we're writing stories tonight, just to show folks. Fourth task is what? Generate as many stories as you can, right? So that's what I was saying, even in class tonight, right? Think of stories, and maybe, if you wrote a few and you're leaving, you could be like, hey, what do you think about this story, right? And for sure, hopefully there's, some folks who want to stop by and say, hey, let's draw the architecture of the project that I'm thinking. That one goes a long way. Like, if you think of all the software that I've built over the years, more often than not, it started at a whiteboard or a napkin in terms of just sketching out how things interact. So that's tonight, and then that fourth, right? And then what? Fifth task is just stand up an app, right? So deploy an app. And the one that's here, and this is the one that I might want to adjust. So if you think of the request fifth task, right? It's a form, right? Via public URL. the intent originally was, a sign-in form, right? You could sign up. There's, over the years, single sign-on has become a little bit easier, but, so I don't know if it's necessarily a form that you would post to, right? So we might adjust this where it's just simply render a get with a 200 OK and your web page is there. The extension of that would be web page is there and there's some form that you hit submit on, right? That gives you a response. You're going to need some of that within the project. And so that was why the form submission was there. So that might be the one adjustment. And then what? Here I just talk about the different stacks, right? That you might want to use. And what, yeah, remainder of the iteration just kind of continuing right down the project. So yeah, if you step back for a second, homework 5 is teams are there. I have kind of a tech stack in mind, right? I know where I want to deploy things. I got some stories going and I deployed Hello World, right? Is the way to think about homework 5. Does that help in terms of, yeah.
There shouldn't really be more than a page.
Yeah, it's single page. Yeah. What? Everybody shook their head. Yeah, this is okay. So maybe we keep the form. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if it's a big deal one way or the other.
If anybody wants to push it back beyond, I could make myself accessible to grading. If it doesn't work out, just definitely take the break as you need to. But raise any concerns if you have them for sure.
Yeah, sorry, here's the deliverables, right? User stories, right? Your form, and this one, we might change to page, right? And what else is here? This is the other one I might pull. Over the years, the burn down the Gantt chart. I'll talk about some of this during tonight's lecture, but a burn down is just simply if you said I have 30 things to do, right? How many did I do week 1, right? I might have done 4. How many did I do week 5? I might have done another 3, right? And so, x-axis is weeks, y-axis is things that you need to get done, and you're just burning down, right? Those things you need to get done. It's interesting. I wouldn't necessarily remove it because of what the spring break and the snow day or anything like that. It's more, I don't actually use these anymore, right? A lot of people do, but I don't know. If you're writing software, it's less about are you reaching a goal, right? Or burning down the number of features. It's more about just, are you doing the same amount of work you did last week that you did the week before or the week before that? So it's much better to just say, I'm always getting 5 things done per week, right? In which case a burn down isn't interesting. It just burns down 5 things each week forever and ever. So yeah, there's a little bit of a difference from when we put this together originally, or even when Ken Anderson taught the class, a while back now, from kind of as practitioners what we do. But I haven't pulled up a Gantt, a burn down chart in a long time. And for architecture UML diagram, that one is simply this diagram, right? You might draw, again, why the whiteboard, so you could have something that you could submit and say, yeah, we got, the first bit of the web app done, right? Which was naturally the web page that you're seeing that says, yeah, I've submitted to my platform of choice. And homework 6 is in the same spirit of this, right? As well as 7. I think one of them picks up, like you have a test, right? Another one, we're trying to check things in the rubric as you're submitting, just so everything doesn't get piled up to the end and you're like, oh my God, I have all this work to do. How do I do all this? And it's like, well, you didn't do it earlier. So the homeworks actually, in some ways, I think help individual's plan, right? So you don't leave everything for the end of it. Okay, I guess while I'm going through all this, should we just go through essays and I'll introduce essays as well? Okay, let me switch screens.
Hey, Professor.
Yep.
This is Preetham. So,
Oh,
I
hey,
wanted
man.
to ask you, could you like share the wiki as well as the GitHub repo that's all like added onto the homework doc if you want?
Say that again?
The GitHub wiki.
Did you put it on, where did you put it?
It's already on the homework file doc. The links are clickable and it goes there.
Oh, oh, this is what I was asking you for. Ah, perfect. I had another one. I didn't, yeah. Did you just do this or did you? Yeah,
No,
2
I
days
had
ago.
done
Yes.
it, but I'm just letting you know.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I was going to use another one. I didn't know. That was my email to you earlier. I didn't know if you had it ready. But thank you. I'll use that. Okay, so let me talk about teams first, just because we're a little bit in that conversation, and then we'll bounce back over to what the essays look like. So the team formation that's happening, there's this page where I guess what we need the team here, right? Such that we know who's completing the essays and who's reviewing the essays. And if you think about what's here, right? There's team name, there's what project name, but we want to get all the teams sitting here, right? And this is where you're going to start talking about topics as well. Let me just look at one thing, Preetham. I think I had another one queued up. Let me just look for 1 second at mine. Do you know, so one change that happened since we did this is GitHub started charging more money for the use of wikis, which was kind of unfortunate. Do you know if you turned that on the last year's project?
I don't think so. It was telling we are getting close to the limit, but I don't think we were charged anything.
Okay, let me look at one thing on my side. Yeah, I'm gonna use this one for a second, just in terms of the team, because it'll help set up the wiki. Oh, sorry, it's actually showing here. Oh no, it's not.
And also we have the team information, like who have formed teams on the people page on Canvas. I think there are
Yeah.
15 teams right now, but 25 students are unassigned, so you could get them to
Okay.
be.
Okay, this one's slightly different than the one Preetham has. And so if there are any dates, don't worry, but there's a template. And so I guess the way to think about your team, right, is getting team members in to the wiki, right? And then these will be used for your projects. So this is like a link to your project overview, right? This will be a link to where you're putting your user stories, right? So this might be a GitHub repo that we'll kind of look at the GitHub project structure. Naturally, this is where the code is, and then this is the URL where you deployed. So each team, right, should have a template, right? Or sorry, each team will copy this template, right? And so you'll be able to go in and edit. And if I went in here and did something like, there's a little bit of markdown going on here, but I would copy the template. And I'd say something like, you could leave the template at the bottom. And then this might be, team name might be, I don't know, Fresh Cloud. And then team member might be Mike. Team member might be Joey. And then URL, right, is going to be something like, again, this could be a GitHub README. This could also be like a doc, right, that you share, but something accessible. User stories, Git repo, something like that. Something like this for the repo itself, and then production software, it might be something like, I don't know, freshcloud.com or something like that. Oops. Right, so each team, right, will show up on the wiki, and then each team will have the roster, each team will have where their project lives, and then this is where we get into kind of the essay world here in a second. But I wanted to pause here. Anything jumping out for folks? Straightforward? Super bizarre. Sorry, I didn't mean to take a picture of my phone either. Anything else, Preetham, on your side in terms of this one? It's a little different than the one you have maybe on the site currently.
Yeah, I can add that if you want.
Okay. Okay, I'll let you add that. Should I bounce back to yours, or I'll use mine for a second? Yeah. Let me just see if there's a chat. Okay, nothing on chat. Okay, so here's where the essays come in, right? So you got your team, right? And there'll be another, let me just, I'll do one more for kicks just so you get a feel for what this looks like. But if I'm team number 2, right, I'm going to copy the template again. And so don't use the template as maybe the takeaway, right? So this would be something like, sorry, Fresh Cloud team. This might be, the next big thing is your project. And this might be Tim, oops, Dave, Matt, Mark, right? Or something like that. Do full names, right? Website URL, same type of thing. And repo, right? This is the next big thing.com. It'd be funny if this was actually, it's not taken yet. So if anybody wants that URL, it's sitting in GoDaddy. And then, right, you're going to save this one. And so then we have the next big thing, right, in terms of the team roster, and then, right, we'll have our stuff populated. Oops, sorry, let me get out of this one. Good. So yeah, don't copy the template, or sorry, copy the template, don't use the template. Just so folks could add everything. Okay, so let's switch gears now to essays, yeah? So the instructions for the essay, what you're going to do is you're going to use the list that was under your team project and write on those topics, right? So if I bounce back for a second and I have language, right? I might have build tool, and your project doesn't necessarily need to be in the language you're writing about, right? In some ways it might be. So if you choose Rust, right, as the language for your project, you might actually write about Rust here, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? And the one thing I guess too to think about in terms of the calendar, the reason for, let's say, the 5, 7, 8 essays was sometimes we had big teams. And if we have bigger teams than 5, I think we'll sort through it. But the idea is that everybody writes an essay, right? So when you're thinking about essays that are due, right, they're due by the team. And typically, right, somebody, says, okay, cool, I'll write the essay for the week, right? And then there's also then the review of other essays, right? So let's say a team member say, okay, I'll write this week. And then 2 other team members or 3 other team members say, okay, cool, I'll review this week, right? And so it's a little bit of that style, right? So when we're talking about essays, it's not every person, right, submitting an essay, it's submitting for a team. And then it's the reviewers, right, are also the team. So it might be such that, if we went to our roster, Tim might do the first essay, Dave, Matt, and Mark are reviewers, right, for essay 1. So, in the calendar, right, Tim's on for, what was the day that we had? The 3rd, right? And then on the 7th, right, in terms of the essay review, right, it's Dave, Matt, Mark. So far, so good in terms of getting the essays going. And then, yeah, the topics for the essay, right, are going to be language. So it might be such that Tim, says something like, I don't know, I'm going to write about, well, here, I'll copy one from Preetham's example. Although I don't think I have edit access to your bit, Preetham.
Did you accept the invite for the org? I think you did.
Maybe I'm in the org. Okay, let me see if I could do it from scratch on ours. So if I were to do something here, let me just get the format. For a team and say, okay, Tim's gonna write about, I don't know, languages on week 1, right? So I would go in and, oops, sorry, not that one. This one. I'd go in here and do something like this. Let's say I want to write about the language. So you'll replace the topic and you'll say Rust. And then in here, right, you're going to like create a page on Rust, right? And this would be Rust as well. And so this is, could folks see this? This is kind of the format for the Markdown in GitHub. So if I save this guy, and then I link to it, right? This will give me a new page. So everything you need to know about Rust. Right, save it. And that becomes your essay. So far, so good? Okay, so if I go back to team project, let's just do another one for kicks. Let's do build tools, or let's do messaging. So let's do RabbitMQ. Oh, shoot, I lost my buffer. Bu- 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 bu. Sorry, save. And this one might be done by Dave now, right? So Dave's taking week 2. And he, this is all things RabbitMQ. Apologies for the typos. Okay, so back to team information, right? We got Rust, we got Rabbit. I guess the one other thing I should have mentioned, you need the week number in here. Okay, so far so good? Okay, so here's where it gets interesting, and I'll let folks look at the instructions. It goes through some examples, but it's really around laying claim to a topic. So this is where the author index comes in potentially. And so if I go in here and I start editing for week 1, do you have this one on yours yet, Preetham, or no?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't know if you filled some of this out.
Yeah, it's all filled. I think you didn't accept the invite. That's why you're not able to edit it.
Oh, okay, let me take a look at his really quick one more time. Oh, no, I thought I meant filled with like some stock data.
No stock data.
Okay. Okay, so we'll just keep doing it live here. Sometimes we'll give folks maybe a hand in terms of some of the stock data, but it actually sometimes makes it worse because people tend to use that stock data then. So on here then, which browser am I at? So this is where like teams would start, talking about what they have as well, right? So this might be team name, what was one, the next big thing. And then this is your link to Rust. This is your link to Rabbit. I screwed up the markdown. And these would naturally be links, right? So we're seeing where things are there. And then the reviewer, right? There's one more place to add things. So your team here, right? So this is around laying claims. So we don't want everybody to review the same article, right? So in here, I would do something and I would say, okay, this is team next big thing, right? And here's the review, the 3 things that I'm reviewing, right, would go here. So bouncing around a little bit, but I guess the takeaway or the intent is to get to the point where teams are learning a lot in a short amount of time. Right, and sorry, the last place to populate is here as well. I think it's gonna be easier if I thought we had one filled out, Preetham. I'll fill one out, for folks. Let me see if I could use last year's. Give me a second. Okay, I'll try not to show too much here. One second. So this is from a few years back. Okay, so if I went to reviewer index, right, this is the team, right, for week 1, Crypto Gremlins. And the articles that Crypto Gremlins reviewed was Trello, testing with Node.js, and Kubernetes. So when you think of the Sunday assignment that's due, it's this reviewer index. Author index, right? If we went to Crypto Gremlins, week 1 they did Pivotal Tracker. Week 2 they did overview of Java. Week 3 they did Node.js, right? So far so good. So that's author index, reviewer index. So author index is where we go to find the Wednesday submission of the essay. Reviewer index is where we go to find the 3 articles that you reviewed. And the last thing that was a little confusing why I pulled this up, if I go back to the instructions page, there's one last bit, which is to make sure everybody doesn't review the same article, which is where? Here on the homepage. And so these are the topics, all topics, right? So if you think of the breakdown that we had, project, language, if you're reviewing, increment and look for things that haven't been reviewed. And then you bump this from, 1 to 2 and say, yeah, I've reviewed it, right? So like we're trying to make sure that nothing gets through such that you create an article and you don't have any peer reviews. This one's a little bit hard to introduce because we do bounce around, but at the end of the day, I don't know, it was the most interesting thing in terms of when I got this class from Ken. I was like, oh my gosh, you learn a ton, right? Because each week you're either writing an article or you're reviewing an article, and chances are high it's on a topic that's not related to what you're building. Like here's a Kotlin overview. Right, strengths, weakness, right, setup. It's kind of what we're looking for in terms of like the scope of the article.
The scope of the review.
Here, I wasn't gonna show, I'm trying not to show names as much. Let me show you, let me go to the instructions here. They're similar instructions. So laying claim is the incrementing the number on the homepage, right? We talked about the author index where you submit, the reviewer index where you review, team, the essay creation, there's instructions here around the creation, and then this is the review. So what I didn't show at the bottom of that one essay are the folks reviewing. And so who's ever reviewing the essay, you just add to the bottom of the essay. And you put your name, right? You put your review. So like here's Ken, right? I liked your essay because, right? And then like sometimes, folks will go back and look at the reviews, right? Anything else jumping out for folks? I guess the one thing on the team side, the way that I just introduced it, let me go back to the other window for a second. Let me find that. Mhm. There's one small adjustment I wanted to make. So on the teams, this one, let's do something different here for a second. Let's not link them here. Let's just put your stack here. So let's just say this is, what was this team name? The next big thing. Let's use this section differently. Let's just talk about your stack in this area. Because it is doubled up a bit from the other. So this would be like RabbitMQ. And I guess the reason for maybe switching slightly is you're probably going to have, something like Google Cloud that you might not talk about, in the essay itself. But let's just leave this one as this is your stack. I'll get an example of this one going. I'll put in my project, and I'll, pick Tyson and Dante. Yeah, we'll add our project so you see our project, and that'll be a cue for folks to get things in. So I'll do that tomorrow morning, and that way you'll have a good project starting point that you could kind of copy in addition to using the template. Super clear, clear as mud. This is one of those things like once you bake a few in, it becomes a little bit easier. Like once you get going and once you submit, you're like, okay, I got it. I just need to put this in and then, right, reviewer index, right? These are the ones I reviewed this week, that kind of thing. Okay, let's take a break for 15 and we'll switch to story writing. And then I'll share a deck. We'll write stories together, and then I'll save time at the end for questions around whiteboard architecture and just, hey, how do I even start writing stories for my project? Like I could get you guys a bit of a jump start for folks who are here. Okay, I'm gonna pause the Zoom for 15, what's it, 12 after 22, 27? Okay. And you could ask questions now too during break if you want. Oh my gosh, I was hoping to like do the story stuff before and I got caught up on this. It's a-
Available now.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
You said Rod?
Part of 2 days.
No, it's good. I'll figure it out here soon enough. Preetham, you still on by chance?
Sorry, Professor. Yeah.
Oh, okay, let's maybe chat after class. Maybe I'll call you or we could go on Zoom or stay on a Zoom.
Sure.
Um,
That's
The repo you have is it's not gonna work with yours because it needs to be public.
So I figured out that you can't make a private organization.
Yeah, we'll use the one I have, so there'll be a small adjustment to the doc,
Okay.
at least for the wiki.
Sure.
Okay. But all the student repos are private in your project right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I just made yours private, which disabled the wiki. We do. Okay, there's 6 left that are public. Maybe we could talk offline. I'm not sure why they triggered public, but they did. Okay, just to catch folks up in terms of what we were going back and forth on. It's kind of unfortunate, like, but the wiki, it has to be public to, like, GitHub just changed, right? Their settings. So in order to kind of do the whole essay style, we needed to enable wikis, and to do that, you need to pay a bunch of money. So we'll give you a new link to this project or this Git repo, and yeah, the bad news is we just have to add everybody to it again. So you're going to be part of the classroom that you submit your homework, which goes in as private, but we can't turn on the wiki and keep it private. And so we'll have to bounce over to this Colorado Collective repo that I have. And then, in all honesty, this is what I've used in the past. So if you look at this, you know, there's years of repos. We switched to the classroom, right? Because that's, I don't know what you're supposed to do, use GitHub Classroom. But yeah, I didn't necessarily anticipate we'd be charged for using this feature of the wiki. So yeah, I need to Preetham or I'll transfer all the stuff from an old wiki. I think I'll just do it tonight, Preetham, and then I'll put in an example team for you as well, just so you see it. So I'll do this little Scratch round app that I built. I did this one year for my project, but I'll put that one in for folks. Okay, so more to come, but takeaway is different URL. We had to pay a bit of money to GitHub to get the wiki going for the essay. But yeah, sorry, Preetham, I was scratching my head. I'm like, oh my God, how'd you get it going? I thought there was some magic, but I think it was just simply because it was public. Okay, so let's talk about stories. I guess the good news is we could also now use stories that are here, or sorry, the projects that are here as well. So yeah, in a moment here, I'll create a new project and we'll dive in. But let's look at some slides first. Let me just switch windows for a second. And I'll share this whole deck with folks, but I'm gonna probably bounce around a little bit just for time. Let's spend a half hour maybe on story writing, try to write some stories together, and then save a little bit of time for the project group I mentioned. Okay, so I guess a couple things to talk about before we write stories or dive into stories. When we kick off projects, there's maybe a few things that we think about when we set up new work. And so we won't dive into a lot of this in terms of your project. So we're not going to ask you to talk about your product goals and your business goals and risks and that kind of thing. But this agenda, I would say, twice this week, I used some variation of the agenda that's here. And whether that's a new company that truly has an idea, right, hasn't really formally thought about what they want to build, or if it's an existing company that has a new product that they've thought about for a while, this agenda is really, it's to help with that intersection between engineering and product, right? So it's getting devs on the same page as the product team. And I guess over the years, we found out the best way to do that is to run some flavor of this agenda. And so I'll talk a little bit about the goals, risks, and then really where you get into kind of the meat of things are actors, activities, and then stories. Sorry, that's that alarm again, thanks. And stories are where we'll kind of dive into here tonight. So I'll move through some of these pretty quickly. But goals, there's definitely a bit around what does success look like? What does a win look like? With a lot of software, it might be something like financial success. It might be something like adoption. So we're doing a project for the Colorado Horse Rescue around fires and letting horse owners, dial 911 or basically send a text message, right, to say, hey, I need help, come help me evacuate horses. And it goes out to a handful of folks in a network of trailers or horse trailers, right, which are typically horse owners themselves. But when you're thinking about success, right, and goals, like for the Colorado Horse Rescue, I mean, their ultimate goal is to save the lives of horses, right, such that you don't have fires, right, that spread too quickly, such you just let horses go as the last resort. So for them, it was very much around maybe controlling the chaos, right? Even you think too many trailers might show up and that causes a problem just evacuating the horses in the first place, right? So the app that we're building, it's going to go live in a week or so here, is really somewhat controlling the chaos, but success for them looks like they've saved horses' lives, right? So when you're thinking of those goals, it's a little bit of, okay, well, what are we building, right? In this case, we're building an application that knows how to alert people with trailers, or lets horse owners alert people with trailers they need help, right? There's definitely goals and risks associated, and then there's work that needs to be done. Work that needs to be done tied to those risks ends up with this prioritized backlog of small stories. And so if you think of any software engineering project or just projects as a whole, right, you might hear terms like Gantt charts, right? So Gantt charts, will tie to dates, pretty, hard dates, right? There might be things that you need to meet in terms of maybe there's a marketing campaign, maybe there's a television commercial, right, going out. But folks have seen Gantt charts, right? Kind of work that needs to be done, right? It's the same in terms of months, years, or days, right, on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, well, I won't show is the work. But really, when we're talking about stories, right, there's a lot of different names that'll pop up these days. Some people call stories tickets, right? So Jira might call a story a ticket. GitHub might call a story an issue, right? We've stuck with the name story. And really the idea of the story is this placeholder for a conversation, right? And if you think of what we're doing, we're bringing engineers closer to product, such engineers understand the story such that they give feedback, right? The interesting thing with stories is a lot of times product folks who are defining the work might not know how long the work takes. And an engineer might say something like, oh, I could do that in, I don't know, 2 weeks. And product owner might be, really? Like, wow, it's a long time. And you want to give the developer the opportunity to say, well, if we did it slightly different, I could do it in 2 days. And product owner might be like, you know, that's awesome. And then the dev might say something like, oh, shoot, you know what? I could do it in a few hours if you just use standard HTML components, right? So having that conversation and having, you know, that list that gets prioritized by the product owner, right? So here's the work, and the priority of that list is such that there might be a board meeting. There might be, you know, for us with the Colorado Horse Rescue, there's, we're gonna go live, right? So like this week and next week is around production readiness. Like, do we need maybe more database backups more frequently, right? Do we need extra app instances, right? Such that we could handle load, right? If there was a fire in the next month or so. So yeah, playing goals and risks against the work that needs to be done is how you get to, right, that prioritized list of stories. There is an article, placeholder for a conversation. This is a really good read. So I'd encourage folks, maybe this is a good spring break read, right? While you're either on the plane or, I don't know, playing disc golf outside, right? But it's a really good article, and it talks about a little bit of the history of where stories came from. And some of the slides I have coming up cover some of this. But this is what I was getting at, like people, you know, switch to this word called ticket. And I don't know, for me as a developer, I never want to like, I don't know, I'm going to deliver tickets, I'm going to work tickets, I'm going to write software against tickets. It feels like so disconnected from, you know, the actual conversation that I might have with a product owner. I don't know, at one point we tweeted, I think it's actually on here. There's a tweet, right? All hope is lost when your stories are called a ticket. And some of the remote work and some of the work from home, it's interesting. Kim talks about it a little bit, right, with the COVID thing that happened a few years back. But when people went home and wanted to work from home, especially asynchronous, the ticket became even more front and center. Like just write down what you want me to do and I'll go do it because I want to not think about the software I'm writing. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's like the opposite of what we like set out to do 20 years ago, right? When some of the things around Agile were first introduced. But this is a really good read. We send this to a lot of our customers, and our customers, you know, some might have the, holy cow, I can't believe we've been doing it wrong. Some might be like, got it, doing it, you know, good to go. But this is a nice read when you're thinking about kind of homework 5 and writing stories. Okay, so let's take a look at goals. I guess there is also, when we start thinking about goals, right? Business goals, product goals, non-goals. So an example of a business goal might be something like, yeah, we're trying to increase revenue. We're trying to optimize costs. Or in the horse rescue, we're trying to save horses, right? Usually, right, goals are measurable, right? Did I move the needle, right? Did I gain more adoption, right, from users? Did we, I don't know, introduce software to a market or a group of people that before hadn't used software all that much, right? So business goals, right? And then if you switch to product goals, I don't know, I always like the Gmail example when it came out, right? Like with Gmail, there was never a doc that you had to go to and try to figure out how to use Gmail. It was really, like early days of Gmail was really nice in terms of, oh yeah, it's my email, I know how to go through, I might even set up some hotkeys to move through Gmail quickly. But if you think of product goals, easy to use, easy to understand, those things jump out, right? And then there's also maybe some of the non-functional goals. So non-functional is an interesting word, but basically those are, the app doesn't function if those aren't in place or if those don't happen. So like supporting 200, right, concurrent users. We had a project a few years back, or maybe not that long, but it was a sports book. And think of people swiping, you know, on the Super Bowl, or even during the playoffs, right? They're betting and they're trying to get their bets in, and they're trying to get bets that they won or lost from, you know, the morning game to the afternoon game. And they wanted to support, it was 400,000 concurrent users, and they were at maybe 100,000 when we started. And I think we got them to like 600,000 concurrent users. And concurrent meaning that like 600,000 people could swipe at the same time and their app refreshes. That one I talked about with the NHS, that was, we needed to support 5 million registrations in the first hour, which is kind of interesting to do. So that's maybe call it 1,500 registrations per second might have been the breakdown on the math on that. And it's interesting when you're building software in terms of product goals, that goal only lived for a day or two, right? Because then everybody would have signed up and it became less interesting in terms of performance around registrations, right? The entire country registered. And so think of like scaling down infrastructure, right, around those product goals as well. And then what else? There might be one more here in terms of non-goals. So when we're setting up projects, it might be, let's say during the description, the product owner's going through and talking about, well, we'd like to roll out the product in Europe, right? We're gonna start in the US, but we wanna go to South America, then we wanna go to Europe. So a non-goal for me, like, you know, if you think of, okay, the next 6 months, like, you know, do we need to worry about language, right? So their timeline for South America might have been year 2, right? US year 1, South America year 2, and then Europe year 3. And so if I'm thinking about the next 3 months, right, multi-language isn't a goal right now, right? So after the end of 3 months and standing up maybe this minimum viable product, if I, you know, showed it to an end user and said, look, you know, we're supporting Spanish, they'd be like, oh, that's great, but we're not going to roll it out to Spain or South America for another year. So it's good to talk about non-goals and even some of the scalability, right? There's a bit of scale and there's a bit of performance that you get for free these days. But non-goals might be, you know, there's 20 users of the app. So we don't need to support 500,000 concurrent users, right? That type of thing. And sure, I think I mentioned this in terms of why our goal is important, right? It's really bringing product and engineering together, right? So if the goals early on are communicated to me as a developer, I feel better day to day, right? Knowing that I'm building the right thing. So when we talk about stories, we'll break stories down or the work, right, into this small, you know, placeholder for a conversation, right? Sometimes developers, engineers get a little bit lost, like, well, why am I doing that story next? And why am I doing this story next, right? Like I wanna support the crew in South America. I wanna, you know, do this multi-language thing. And having those high-level goals and knowing that, okay, well, that's not till year 2, you know, I'll maybe feel a little bit better and not be worried about, you know, why I'm not doing multilingual support, right, for the or multi, yeah. But yeah, it's really this getting engineers and product on the same page. I think I might have told this story when I first moved to Colorado. This was with the crew from Lucent. It was product was on the first floor and then engineering in the basement. It was like, oh my gosh, we're like communicating via email, right? We're like, you know, scheduling meetings to go meet at times. And it's like, well, what? Like, can't we just move our desks, right? And have product and engineering for a given bit of software sit together, right? So I could just turn to my product owner and say, hey, what do you think? Versus like scheduling a meeting. Like it might take a day to get a meeting because the person's calendar is booked or something like that, when it really wasn't, right? I'm just looking at Outlook or Google Calendar and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna be able to meet with this person. And it's like, oh yeah, I just blocked out time because I wanted to get work done. But it's like, this is the work we're doing. So yeah. But yeah, all the goals are really about getting things, bringing product and engineering together, right? Okay, so that's goals. Let me switch to risks here for a moment. So risks, let's see what I got going here. So, right, this is what's getting in front of us from achieving those goals or building software. The biggest for me, and this happened in basically the meeting yesterday, that the agenda I just shared at the beginning. Usually integrations, right, are the biggest risks, right? Especially integrations that you don't know about, right, or haven't done before. So if you think of Tyson and myself showing up as consultants, if you said something like, we want to integrate with Twilio for SMS messaging, awesome, done that 100 times. We want to integrate with SendGrid for email, great. We've done that not only on a handful of apps, but we actually worked with SendGrid, right, to build some of the software. But if there was an integration that we didn't know, there's one recently, a hotel booking integration that we're working with. And if we've never written that software before, right, it makes it a little risky, right? So we might be able to, mitigate some of that risk by looking at their API, right? We might be able to say, yeah, I think it's all there, right? I'm 80% confident. But that 20%, if, for some reason, there's not context or a user, or in this case, we were relying on email to identify an individual across systems. And it turned out this booking system, email wasn't required, right? It was last name that was the only required field. So if you think first name, last name, email, I mean, who would have thought like people picked last name, right? Like how many last names are Brown or Smith? And like, how am I supposed to like identify uniqueness based on last name? And so that integration, right? We knew it was risky in a sense we hadn't done it before, but we didn't know how risky it was that they actually didn't have like a unique identifier that we could identify somebody with, other than, sure, they had a database table where they maybe had, an auto-generated ID for that user, but we didn't have access to that, right? We had to rely on, we wanted to rely on email, last name, first name. And what we ended up doing was we just said, okay, well, email is required for anything that we're using the app for. So if somebody gets in there without an email, our app's not going to work for them. And that's all we could do. But that was super risky. What else? A lot of stuff around risk, like timeline and scope, right, becomes too big. There's a lot around risk where if folks are new to building software, right, they may not know that software projects fail, right? They may not know that things change, right? So even if we scope or estimate, 12 weeks for 2 individuals, it's just an estimate, right? Sometimes we're close, we're never right on, right? Usually we're a few weeks plus or minus, but more often you're a few weeks plus, right? So that 12 weeks is really 14, and it's actually maybe 16. And the reason that you have this term called scope creep, right? You add more scope. It's not necessarily us not estimating, but it's more just the full feature set wasn't communicated, or features changed as we're building, right? And the customer or the product owner or the person, wanting to build the software is like, oh yeah, shoot, that doesn't work. So let's do something else. And this is like week 7. And it's like, okay, well, we're happy to do something else, but the something else you're describing is another 7 weeks of work, right? Which means, yeah, scope got impacted. So what else? I think I talked about, timeline, cost. And then, sure, there's unrealistic dependencies. So the other thing with risk, this one's really a hint, or maybe talking about teams. So if you have team A, B, and C, we're all building software and we're all supposed to come together, right, at the end of 12 weeks, and all the software is supposed to work perfectly. So think you have a data collector, you have a data analyzer, and you have a web app for your project. So if you each go off, right, 1, 2 people on each of those, depending on team size, and think, okay, at the end, this is all going to come together, chances are high, right, or it's very risky, right, that may or may not happen, right? It's much better to write those 3 pieces, right? And this is in the context of your project, right? write a little bit of each, right? And continuously integrate, right, with the different bits. So you might write the collector and get some basics going. You might tie that to the analyzer, get some basics going, tie it to the web bit, get some basics going, and then iterate on kind of all three at the same time, just so you know the three glue together properly. But that, a lot of times, that's actually the biggest risk as well, where, you know, it might be such that, oh shoot, the person working on the data collector, I don't know, they got COVID, right? Or they went on spring break and had a blast and didn't want to come back for another week, you know, or something like that. But so yeah, you want to mitigate risks. And then this is a 2x2 that is interesting in terms of how to mitigate. So like think of maybe some coarse-grained features, right? Like, you know, I want to go collect data from InfoQ, right? And then I want to analyze that data, right, for sentiment. And then I want to display the results of that data, right? Those three, you know, you might put on, right, this 2x2. And if you've never collected data from InfoQ, right, you might say, I don't know, that's maybe right in the middle or something like that, right? And then what high risk might be analyzing, like we've never analyzed InfoQ data, we're not sure what we want to do. And so you get this kind of 2x2 going, right, such that you could start to mitigate risk. The other 2x2 that I've been using recently is in terms of prioritization, and this is maybe a little bit on the next few slides, but if you think of impact, right, and then effort is also a nice 2x2. So I think the last 2 months I've done it 3-4 times. So if you think of feature that you're building, right, you know, what's the impact? A lot of times you're thinking impact to end user, right? You could think, you know, you could take almost the rubric, right, that is in there and say something like, I don't know, message queue, right? You know, it's low impact in terms of my grade, right? And effort's high, right? So I guess I've never done that with the rubric, but you could kind of put things in the level of effort and impact could be against your grade, impact could be against end users, but it helps you prioritize and think about the work that's at hand. Does that make sense, or did I drift a little too far on effort and impact? Okay, then maybe how do we mitigate risks, right? Well, naturally it's going to cost more money. It's going to take more time. And then what, right? The more you could get in front of things, right? Like reducing integrations. So the scoping, the project that we kicked off and, you know, went through this kind of agenda yesterday. There's a bit where it was unclear whether the mobile device, especially on iOS, would be able to get information that this individual wanted to get, right? And if you think of some of the privacy, like iOS is super locked down, right? And so like ways to tackle risk there might be something like, oh, well, let's roll our own Android OS, right? We could deploy it on a Samsung device or something like that, right? That, I mean, that one's like, oh my gosh, that sure, we mitigated the risk, but you know, effort went through the roof on that one. Or it could be just, let's not do that feature, right? Let's not do that integration. You know, if we use that SendGrid example or the Twilio example, so SendGrid's like almost the default, other than maybe there's MailChimp, right? So think sending newsletters. And, you know, if I went to Preetham and said, or Preetham said to me, hey, I just built this new, right, thing that knows how to send transactional emails, and would you use it? And I might be like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm gonna just go with the SendGrid. And he's like, yeah, but it's got all these features that you're gonna miss out on. And it's like, well, I don't know, I'm gonna just go with SendGrid because it's a known good quantity. And so you might be, you know, talking with your product owner that wants those features, but you know, kind of unwind some of those features from the product owner such that you de-risk, right? Like our day-to-day as consultants, really all we're doing is, sure, we're writing software, but we're trying to eliminate or reduce technical execution risk. Is kind of an interesting way to talk about things. Okay. Anything on risks? And again, while they're not maybe called out in homework 5, or they're not called out in terms of write your project, or we're not asking necessarily for the 2x2 or the effort and impact. Use this set of slides to guide, right, you in terms of your project. And if you took, the one I always go back to is metrics and monitoring, right, that assignment. So a health check, right? All you have to do is respond and say, I'm healthy, versus like diving into, you know, a whole, you know, call it Prometheus and Grafana world. Okay, I need a battery here, I think. Well, I got 20%. Let me see how far we get with the 20%. Okay, so let's switch to user stories. Try to go, I guess let me ask the crew, should I slow down? Am I moving fast, or is it better? Do people have project questions after, or should I? No? Okay, so I might have all the 25 minutes if needed. Okay. Okay, so what? I think for right now it's concepts, terminology, and some of this I've talked about, but there's also maybe some of the benefits, limitations. So I think Mike Cohen used to live in, oh, that's awesome, thank you. Oh, these are awesome.
Those things are nice.
That, yeah, if anybody wants to get a power, these anchors are really good. There's another one that Tyson or Damien in our office bumped into, and it's like double stack, which is kind of crazy. But these are awesome.
That one was awkward.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know, best tech in the office for charging. Other than maybe best tech is the Airs now, and sorry, I'll dive into stories here in a second. The Airs support dual monitor, so the M3 Airs. It's you know, for us it was like, oh my gosh, finally, because we'll have 2 screens and we'll practice paired programming or whatnot. So we went through cycles of Airs because they're super light. They're awesome to carry, to travel and whatnot, and they're super fast. They just never supported 2 displays. They do now. So if you have an Air, if you have, I don't know, the difference in the trade-in value, do it. Yeah, we're trying to get all ours through before the trade-in value drops too far on the M1s or M2s. Anyways, okay, so Mike Cohen, there's a book on user stories applied. It's a pretty good book, and it dives into a lot of maybe the classical approach to story writing. I have a friend that I think when he was putting together the book, he was actually working with Mike Cohen at that startup, right? So some of the inspiration for, you know, books and whatnot that are up there, there is a lot of Colorado, right? Believe it or not. I went to a domain-driven design talk last week or conference 2 weeks ago, and like the keynote speaker was a Boulder person for a long time. It's kind of a fun crowd. But yeah, Mike Cohen, it's a good book. But so think of stories, you know, back in the day, we would talk about requirements, right? And stories are still doing so, right? They're capturing requirements, right? There's just a little bit more context. So, you know, when I was at Lucent, call it 2001, right? We do these big planning things, right? For 6 months, and we decide if we want to then write software, and we try to capture all the requirements. It just never really played out in practice. Like, you can't think about all the software you're going to build before you build it. You have to build it at some point, right? And you have to get feedback from users, and you have to release software. So what the horse rescue app that I talked about a little bit earlier, we probably released working software within 10, 12 weeks and got owners and drivers, people with trailers registered, you know, into the app, getting feedback. And it's really right now where we're turning on kind of the last big feature, which is you could request help, right? Or, you know, dial 911, although you're not dialing, you're messaging. But yeah, stories are really, right, capturing what we would classically, you know, think of as requirements. So the spreadsheet of like 10,000 lines, you know, that's gone. And the 10,000 might be a little bit much in terms of numbers. So my sister spent a lot of time in aerospace. And that Gantt chart in her project plan, she had one that was 25 years, right? From start to when the satellite launched. And so imagine like all the requirements and what they're putting in. I would say that one's different, right? Because you're actually launching a satellite into space. It's very different than, early days of a piece of software like Twitter or early days of Gmail even, right? Even Gmail, right? You're able to iterate on. Software as a service or web apps in general, right? It's really nice to ship early and then iterate on features. A little different when, you're sending that satellite into space. So she was probably still in that, big design Gantt chart. One day she brought a book, it must have been like that thick, and that was her feature set for some of the software. It was totally crazy. But anyways, that's the rare case where some of this still applies. I would say more often than not, right, we're writing small stories and what really it's a bit of this bullet list, right? So we're trying to communicate, right? There's different stakeholders, right? There might be customers, users, business, marketing, developers, right? If you think of me saying product and engineering and bringing those teams together, there's a little bit more, right? In terms of that team, right? There might be folks who are going to help deploy the software. There might be folks who, run that commercial or run that marketing campaign. So some of capturing requirements is to get everybody in the loop. I would say the diagram on the right, there's a lot of variations. But if you think of those stories, right, and as we're starting to write stories, and I guess the one thing to say too is anybody could write a story. I think we got into this mindset where they only come from product, right? And then developers, go and build the software based on the ticket. That was never the case, and still for us isn't the case. So I actually write a lot of stories. I actually write all the stories on one of the projects right now. And I try to hand off, right, to other folks. But it's okay, right? If you think I'm an engineer, right, and we're trying to write stories such that developers could consume those stories and build software, right? And it's like, okay, well, let me just show you like what I'm comfortable consuming in terms of stories. So I'll just write them early days. So a lot of projects, Tyson, myself, will write a lot of the stories and then hand off more towards that traditional product owner crew writing stories. But this diagram in the upper right is maybe the way to think about I don't know, some of the stories, right, in terms of desirable, right? So if you have design, product design, right, is it going to be desirable? Product management, right? Is it going to help the business, right? Is it going to be viable? And then engineers, right, feasible. Can we build it? If you think of that earlier description when I said we'd go from 2 weeks to 2 days to 2 hours, right? I'm pushing on the can we build this, right? But also extending it to, well, hey, we could build it a lot faster if we, get rid of, this JavaScript widget in place of just a basic HTML component, right? If you think of a web app. So this diagram on the upper right, I think is interesting in terms of talking about stories and how stories get going. But then there's also, right, this one where, sure, waterfall is still okay, especially if you're launching a satellite, but it's more around this one below where it's, let's introduce some features and then test, right, get user feedback, introduce some more, test, right, get feedback. The diagram that we have here, right, is in the spirit of that. Right, so build, run, learn. And do it as early as possible. Here. Okay, so let's keep going. I think I've talked about this in terms of small scope, maybe this last bullet is interesting, right? We're spreading out the decision-making, right? Such that everything's not up front, or we're trying to define things that we might not even have enough knowledge early on. Okay, so what stories themselves? I guess the one thing I didn't say is stories might be called tickets. Stories might be called issues. Stories at the end of the day are also just simply features, right? That are going in. Story might also be a bug, right? Is maybe the way to think about that. But there's a few things, right? There's in the story, there's the basics of, okay, well, who's right using the bit of software. So if you said something like, you know, I should be able to log in, sorry, I'm getting blown up on text and phone. Yeah, who's the user, right? As an end user, I should be able to log in with username and password. Like that might be a fine story, right? Where stories get big, and maybe if you said something like, we want a CAPTCHA, we want two-factor authentication, right? We want strong password as well. We want Google OAuth, you know, and a handful of different ways to sign in. That's where that story kind of explodes. And I'd argue, right, to keep them small, right, we'd break those out into individual stories. What else is here? So short description, conversation, and then this is where some of the card conversation confirmation comes in. These are the slides I was mentioning where this is a really good read. So Kim goes into some of the background of maybe the history. But if you think, you know, we're going to write down, right, what we want to build, right, on a 3x5 index card. So before, you know, let's say there were tools that we're using, right, we would put them on 3x5 index cards and there'd be a stack, you know, by my desk, right? And I'd look at the card and be like, oh, okay, let me go talk to my product owner and make sure I understand what's going on. I might take some notes on the back of the card, right? And then I start doing work. And then at the end, right, I'd go to my product owner and say, you know, I think I'm done. You know, what do you think? And I'd, you know, picture me literally just giving, you know, the person the card, right? I mean, we got a little bit better over the years, and then we had a board, right? Like think on that wall, there might be some columns in terms of there's work that needs to be done, there's work in progress, and then there's work that is done, or work that needs to be reviewed, right? Is maybe another way to think about it. And so truly, like walls were just filled with 3x5 cards, right? The interesting thing is that we throw out those cards at the end, right? I don't know what happened with, I don't know, product engineering, but people feel like they need to keep the cards, right? Like they're going to go back and look at what was there in the past. It's rare people go back to those cards, right? And it's why we threw them out in the first place. It's like, I don't know, that the card is embodied in the software that we wrote. If we want to change it or understand what's there, use the app, right? So again, this one's a pretty good read in terms of a little bit of the history. And then here's a few example, right, stories, right? Let's say this is a job search, right? User could post a resume, right? User could search for jobs, company can post new openings, user could restrict access or not to their resume. The one thing too is that a lot of times we'll write stories such that there's business value, right? Is maybe the way to think about it. So for me, a story might not be, I need to get my app deployed to Google Cloud, or I need to create a table in Postgres, right? Like that, there's no business value there, right? It's just something I need to do such that a user could sign in with username and password, right? I probably need a database, right? I probably need, you know, a table that has, let's say, email, right? It might also have salt and hash, right? The password hash, right? And so I'd create that table, but I wouldn't call that a story, right? I would just do that in the context of, oh, I should be able to sign in with username and password. And then this one, I think that one's from Mike Cohen's book, but if you think of stories, they're independent. So even in the example of the signing in, right? the adding the strong password, right? Even though it feels like it's tied, right, to the first story. So there might be a dependency, right, in terms of ordering of things. But like that story, I could do at any point, right, to say I want a strong password, right? Or if I said something like, I want to, switch to, make sure two-factor auth is there, right? So you'd get two-factor auth would be something like, I provided my username and password, but then I got a text from Twilio that said, here's the six-digit code. Is this you? And I can type in the 6 digits, and that would be my second factor, right? Would be SMS, password being the first. But some of those things, even though they're tied to the theme of sign in with username and password, they're still independent, right? And can come later, right? Could come after, some other, set of features altogether. Okay, so there's a few more slides. Let me pause 1 second. I'm gonna switch gears and I'm gonna skip a few slides and then I'm gonna create that. Okay, so here's one more bit, right? This kind of term epic. So a collection of stories. There's different ways, terms people use, whether it's work stream maybe or epic. But think, if I were to say something like, a user should be able to manage projects, right? That one feels pretty big. And one of the tools folks use to start breaking stories down into smaller ones is to use this concept of CRUD. So CRUD is create, read, update, delete. The interesting thing about read is it's maybe list and show. And so a lot of apps, for good or bad, right, are actually CRUD-based apps. If you think of frameworks like Python, Django, Ruby on Rails, Ruby on Rails was almost intended, to solve for CRUD-based apps. So, I need to create some data, right? I want to read that data as, a list or an individual entry. I might want to update that data and then delete it, right? And that data could be anything from, I don't know, record collection to, inventory of vehicles, right? So I'm going to create a new vehicle, right? We just got one on the lot, right? I'm going to let end users, right, list all the vehicles, right? I'm going to show the individual vehicle, right? And I might do something like I'm going to update the price of the vehicle because it's not selling, right? And then when it's sold, I'll delete the vehicle from the site, right? So think Audi.com, right? For certified pre-owned vehicles, it's that. It's kind of CRUD. They might add something on top of it, like a faceted search, meaning, I could search for blue Audi A5s, or something like that. But that's really just a variation of kind of listing and showing. So let's switch gears. Does this get people kind of in the maybe idea of, stories flowing? Okay, let me share that other GitHub repo and let's write some stories for 5 minutes. And then I'll stick around too if folks have questions. I know I kind of dumped a lot on folks too in terms of content. Shoot. One more. So let's use what? Let's do like homework 4, which was the provenance work. So if you think of homework 4, and there's a couple of views for stories. This is a list view, but let's let's start adding something like, and there's different ways to talk about stories, right? You know, let's say I can view a list of articles from InfoQ. Right, that might go in as a story. And then another one that might go in the kind of that spirit of CRUD, I can view an article from InfoQ. Right, might be another one. And this is where it gets interesting in terms of breaking things up. It might be something like I could view so let's look at like InfoQ for a second. And I know we did kind of the API version of this, but if I went to InfoQ, this would be maybe an example of what we just did. So if I popped trending in front, you know, I could list trending articles, right? I could click on, right, the trending article. And then what? There might be then images associated with, right, trending article. But the interesting thing is to try to break things up, right, as small as possible. So let's say, let's look at this page for a second, right? So there's naturally the sign up, right, login, right? So, right, looks like I'm able to sign in with username and password, right? Looks like I'm also able to log in with Google, Twitter, Facebook, and or sign up with those. So let's see what these stories would look like going in. So sign up with username and password. I could also sign out, probably. I could sign in. And then I can sign up via what was it? Or X, right? Can sign up via Facebook. Can sign up via, what else was here? Oh yeah, it's Google. There's probably Google. Right, so those start to get flowing as well. What else is on the page? It looks like I could search for articles. Looks like what? What else? There's some kind of banner in terms of recent events. So let's so this is an interesting one. If I say based on article name, I would probably break these up if I'm able to can search for articles based on text within articles. Right, so if I were to look for placeholder, right, Kim's comes up first, but there's probably, right, mention of the word placeholder in the article. And that's an example of starting to break things down into small stories. Like I wouldn't leave search as this one big thing. And the reason I'm not doing that is it's, you know, imagine if I did all of the search things and then showed it to my product owner or, you know, whoever I'm building this for. There's not an opportunity to say, oh, well, hang on, we don't actually need a switch. We don't need a search based on content. I actually only wanted, right? Or I got feedback, right, from people that they're not searching content, they're just searching by title. So breaking those up, right, goes a long way. 1 second, and then breaking up sign in, right? Like you could say, oh, most of our users are Facebook, so let's do that first, and we could do Twitter and Google later.
Do you hierarchy at all?
So hierarchy is the priority. So In that example, right, it might be something like, okay, sure, I want to sign in, right? And then I'm gonna need to sign out. And then you could say, right, in that example, I wanna sign up, right, with Facebook. And so that would be the priority. And then the hierarchy in terms of dependencies, it might be such that the priority is set such that it lets, you know, ones down here go in next. Is that what you meant?
I think maybe not, like if you make a task like big sign up page, and then you realize, oh, this is way too big. Instead of like when you're splitting it up, do you do a hierarchy underneath, like?
So sometimes there's tasks, right? Like you might scratch some notes in terms of, okay, here's the tasks I need to do. So, like this one, I might need to integrate with Facebook, right? Or, I might need to store whatever I got back from Facebook in the database, right? Such that I could look up by email, or even just simply like display, right? Like if you think of what's happening here, right? Somewhere they know about me, even though we're using federated accounts, right? Where we log into the single sign-on, right? This app is still probably keeping some notion of me, right? Such that they could, yeah, display information about me. But this is mainly what we're looking for homework 5, right? Is starting to build out this list, right? And starting to build it out in the context of your application. There's one last thing, maybe a tool, and then I'll let everybody go. Gherkin, sorry. No, it is actually Gherkin. I'm trying to find an article. Oh, it's GH. Yeah. Is that what it was? Somewhere you'll bump into Gherkin and stories and writing stories using this as a you know, InfoQ reader, right? I want to sign in, right, so that I could publish articles, right? Or because, but this style, right, has become a little bit mainstream. Sometimes we'll move away from it intentionally, and maybe that's why my default wasn't to put it in here. Sometimes people get too hung up on the syntax, right? So like this one I could rename, you know, this would be something like, as a user, I should be able to sign in via username and password so that I have access to the application. But if you start with the story as a placeholder for a conversation, like this is where you're like creating tickets for devs, and you're trying to write everything such that you don't need to talk to developers as a product owner, and that's not good. So yeah, it's fine if you keep them light, right? To the point where it's like, I should be able to sign up, right? I could view a list of articles, right? Like here, I don't need to write as a user, or, you know, as a reader, you know, I should be able to, you know, view articles. Yeah. Treble light. Okay, that's everything. Awesome. You're gonna write stories. Margarita on the beach. If you're going somewhere, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I just have to write 2 more stories before I get. No, it's not that exciting. You have a little like the moleskin, is it called, right? And you're like, oh my god, I got a new idea for a story. I'm gonna write it down. Just carry it with you. Okay, bug me. Tyson will be back in action here. I guess next week, spring break. Enjoy. We'll see you soon.
Very well.